Hi, I'm Quincas and I'm a synth DIY guy. Welcome to part 3 of my series on the Erica Synths Polivoks inspired kit bundle. Today we're looking at the last 4 modules in the bundle: the modulator, the dual VCA, the Midi-CV converter, and the output module. These are generally a bit more complex to build than the previous 3 because they are PCB sandwiches, with 2 boards each. But still fairly straightforward if you take your time and build carefully and with focus. Let's start with the modulator. This module is a modulation source combining a triangle and square wave LFO, a noise source, and a sample and hold. The sample and hold voltage input is normal to the white noise, and the clock input is normal to the internal LFO square wave, but it also has external inputs for both the clocking and the voltage source, which makes it very flexible. One interesting detail about the build is that you get 2 choices for the noise board. One is transistor based and slightly simpler to build. The other is based on a Zener diode and reportedly provides a fuller range white noise. I chose to build the Zener board, but I might use the other one to make a simple noise module later. Another interesting detail is that this module uses a dedicated old-school tin can type sample and hold IC, which is rare and, as far as I know, only made in Riga nowadays. It is a very stable sample and hold. There is no audible drop in the held voltages. This is an extremely high-quality analog sample and hold. As for the build, it's pretty straightforward. If you haven't already, please watch the previous videos in this series, so I don't have to repeat myself too much. The control board actually has no standing resistors, so you can just start with resistors and diodes, then IC sockets, and onward towards taller components as usual. Soldering from the top is easy on this one, and makes it quicker and more efficient to build. Make sure to orient the tin can IC correctly. There's a little tab you need to line up to the silk screen. And the pads are small, so be economical with the solder there. Again, as usual, don't solder any of the panel components until you've made sure they line up with their respective holes on the panel. The noise board does have quite a dense forest of standing resistors though, so be careful not to make any mistakes, as it's a pain to have to remove any of these. Personally, I like to snap on the headers first, then solder them, making sure everything fits. I made the mistake of mounting the module while powered on, and the LED shorted out when both legs touched the upper rail of my skiff. So I replaced the LED and put some hot glue over the leads to avoid that happening again. But you can just mount it with the power off and avoid the issue altogether. Actually, we should always mount the modules with the power off, for many reasons. Also, there are no screws or spacers, so it's a good idea to apply some glue to the headers once you're sure the module works, just to make sure the noise board won't fall off at some point. The Midi-CV module has some really cool features. It has both a monophonic and a duophonic mode. And in monophonic mode, you can use separate MIDI channels for the 2 sets of CV and gate outputs. It has dedicated clock and modulation outputs, and an analog glide pot that affects both channels simultaneously. The mod output can be set to respond to velocity or the modulation wheel. It's definitely very cool and incredibly useful. The build was a tricky one for me, however. It was the second module I built right after the first VCO, and I was in a hurry to put it in my rack before going on my Brazil trip. So in my anxiety, I got a few resistors wrong, broke some traces trying to replace them, had to make bridges, and in the end, it just didn't work, even after hours troubleshooting. Erica was kind enough to eventually send me a built one so I could complete this video. Having the factory built one in my hands, I realized I had mounted the MIDI jack the wrong way. It should actually go behind the panel, like this. I also realized I was supposed to install a jumper between 2 pins right next to the microcontroller, which is why my first build never worked. I tried placing the jumper on my failed build to check, and alas, it fired up just fine. So now I have 2 of them. Another detail is that the program button doesn't quite fit through the hole on the panel, so I used the mini drill to widen the hole slightly. Do this carefully if you have the same issue with your kit. Also, the large electrolytic caps on the control board should lay down flat against the PCB. Calibration of the module is very easy. You just need a MIDI keyboard, a properly calibrated VCO, and a tuner. The procedure is clearly described on the manual. Do learn from my mistakes on this one though. Avoid frustration. Take your time, focus. Be sure where everything goes before committing to solder. And don't forget that jumper. The VCA module is actually two VCAs in one, and it has a switch to select between series and parallel operation. In single mode, the VCAs are parallel and can be used separately for two individual voices, for example. In dual mode, they work in series. So for example, you can use one of them with an envelope generator to determine your amplitude contour, and the other with the velocity from your keyboard, so you can alter the overall volume by how hard you hit the keys. You have individual CV level controls for both channels, and the CV inputs are normal high, so you can control the volumes manually to make drones and such. It also has a mixed output, so you don't need an external mixer when using both VCAs in parallel. There's no leakage, it's a very clean module, and calibration is easy, just two trim pots for each channel to set the CV range and the offset. Neither board has any standing resistors, so it's pretty easy. You can start with resistors and diodes, then IC sockets, and onwards toward taller components, and it's easy to solder from above, avoiding having to flip the board constantly. Mount the electrolytic caps and the resettable fuses flat against the board. This one does have a spacer and screws to keep everything together, which also makes it easy to assemble everything before actually soldering on the headers, which helps make sure they line up and everything fits together well. Finally, the output module is just a really useful utility to have in your rack. It has mono inputs for left and right, and two stereo outputs, the main output and a headphone output with dedicated volume control. Great for when you need to check your patch before starting a show, or for sending a stereo line out to a recorder while also sending your mix to the house PA. The right input is normal to the left, so you can still monitor mono patches through both speakers or both headphone channels. The outputs are stereo phono mini plugs, which are included even in the partial kit, as they can be hard to find elsewhere. Also included is the headphone output op-amp, which is a high-quality SMD component conveniently pre-soldered to the PCB. The build is simple. The main board does have a few standing resistors, but most are flat. The control board only has flat resistors. Just make sure you solder the electrolytic caps and resettable fuses flat against the control board so the main board will fit. There are screws and a spacer to snap it all together, and like on the VCA, you can use that to solder the headers after putting everything together, so you're sure they line up. And that's it! The whole 84 HP system is completed. I'll save the audio demo for the next video, as this one turned out rather long. The final installment will focus completely on the features of the complete system and some patching ideas to get you started. I'll get right on that, so you shouldn't have to wait a full week for it. I hope you liked this video. If so, please like and subscribe, leave your comments below, and support me on Patreon. See you soon and stay noisy.